So today, that announcement always throws me. Today, we're going to hear from one of our own. Many of you know him, Peter Fackler. He's been a member of our HLAA Rochester chapter since 2005. And over the years, he's worked on our Walk for Hearing. Remember those? And as well as bringing captions to our theater venues. And he currently coordinates our cochlear implant group, and that has become much more popular and active since he took that on. He's also vice chairman of the National HLAA Board of Directors, following being both the board chair and the treasurer of National. We should also note that Pete is also the president of the New York State Association, with a focus on bringing broad coverage for hearing aids to New York State residents. His academic credentials include an MBA from Michigan and an AB from Duke Universities, as well as professional experience in finance and capital markets, largely at colleges and universities. So with his credentials and backgrounds, Pete is involved at all levels of HLAA, local, state, and national. So don't hesitate to ask him some questions. But today, Pete's going to focus on updating on the latest from National, including a new membership structure. So Peter, come ahead. Thank you very much. And it's very in.
Thank you, Art. I'll be with you all in just a second. I got a little note here from my friend Lauren. The last time I presented, as you know, when you sit out here, you don't know who's up there in the ether, right? And so I presented, and there were Mike Miles from Philadelphia was there. I didn't know it. And Elaine McCaffrey from Chicago was out there, and I didn't know it. And I was talking about things that they know more about than I did. And I was really embarrassed afterwards, and I found out they were on the program, because if they had been sitting out here, I would have tossed the ball to them a couple of times. So I asked Lauren if he would let me know who is up here, just so that I know who everybody is that's in the room, even if they aren't. So thank you very much. Couple of things. I'm really sorry about the food. I was supposed to bring food today, so I hope you all didn't go hungry, because I dropped the ball on that. I was reminded, I was out here getting myself a cup of water, and Barbara was starting the meeting, and she was asking about new people who were new. And it took me back to the fall of 2005, when I walked into the room over here, and my life was pretty much a wreck. I mean, I'd lost my career. I lost my marriage, really. Okay. And so I walked in, and the dynamic quartet of Jeanette Cantor and Marcia Dugan and Barbara Law and Sue Miller quickly had me in tow and made me feel like I was part of the family. So I'm sure many of you have had the same experience, and it's pretty powerful. This organization really changed my life for the better. So thank you. So the national report, and I my work habits are not to be emulated, but I'm a last minute person. I find that my efficiency in getting things done is much greater if I don't have a lot of time. So it was that I got up particularly early this morning I had thought about this, but to pull the materials together. And my report will be a little bit different. Am I doing okay on the mic now? My report will be a little bit different. I'm going to cover things that I don't think I've covered. Remember, I'm not an expert in any of this stuff. I'm going to talk about One thing I'm going to talk about is this debate about untreated hearing loss and cognitive decline. I suspect my friend Eric Mattson over here could talk circles around me on that. But so I'm not an expert, but I'm a little bit connected with some of these things. And in that spirit, we'll move forward. The agenda, such as it is, I'll start with membership because Art asked specifically that we talk about membership. I'll then jump to advocacy. Uh, I don't think I've ever really talked about what National's involved in on the advocacy front. And yet, if when we as individuals consider financially supporting Hearing Loss Association of America, if you had to name one thing of all the things they do that's irreplaceable, it is on the advocacy front. So I want to cover that, and I hope to do a decent job. And I have a handout, not here in paper form, but Dan, I'd like to work with you to figure out how to get this summary of what's going on out to the membership. I'll talk a little bit about Hearing Loss Association financials. And I know I've never talked about that here, but I have a couple things I want to cover just so you're in the know. Uh, I will also announce, I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's always fun to announce a secret, right? I'll announce the location for the 2025 convention as well as the dates. So well, let's begin. There is a handout at your tables that is a two-part piece. It's one that's called Our Community of Support is Growing, and then there's a frequently asked questions about national membership. You can read that at your leisure, but the change in the membership practice of National is very straightforward. It's very straightforward. If you've been a member of National, you're never going to get another bill asking you to send your check for $45. If you've paid your 45, that'll carry you for whatever that anniversary date is. But from here on, rather than distinguish between members and supporters, we're just going to have all of us, one big family. So if you are a donor to National, you will be considered a member. And I don't know how they're going to use I don't know if they're going to continue to call it members or supporters. I don't know that. That's up to management. But they just thought that there were a couple of things in their mind. One was it seemed to be kind of crazy to be dunning people for 45, many of whom are also writing a check to support the organization. And they also felt, management this is, felt that there were some people who felt that if they wrote that check for $45, that was financially supporting Hearing Loss Association. When the brutal truth is, it really wasn't, because the $45 wasn't covering the cost of producing and mailing the magazine. So they're just trying to clean up the communications. So that's the change. That's all it is. I know there've been some people wondering, what is this changing what membership is? But that's all it amounts to. Now, I want to talk about, while we're talking about membership, we really have three organizations we can be members of: National, the chapter, and the New York State Association, right? So I want to talk about all three so that you can know. I think this must get confusing, Dan, to people. How can you be a member of this and that? Well, for the chapter, it's $10 a year. And I assume most of you, if not all, are members, and you get the newsletter and so forth. So $10 a year gets you the chapter membership. A donation to Hearing Loss Association National gets you membership in National. Now, the question is, how could you be a member of the state association, right? Well, the bylaws of the state association have provided for a long time that if you were a member of National, you would be considered a member of the state association. With the most recent modification of the bylaws, the periodic updating, the suggestion was made, well, let's have chapter members automatically be members of the state association too. So some of us are probably members twice, we'll only count once, right? But that's the membership pattern. And so did I cover what you needed there, Art? Okay, thank you. Any questions on that? We're trying to just demystify, and I thought now that Nationals made the change, this was a time to summarize the entire package. Now we'll go to advocacy. And please forgive me, I'm going to read from these notes because I don't. Are we okay? We still on the same planet? Okay. So I'm going to kind of put my nose down and read. And my goal is I want you to hear the different life activities of folks like us that Nationals advocacy efforts are touching. Okay. Because to me, that's where the power is. So I hope I can do a decent job on this. Regulatory actions that we're involved in. We have comments out to the hearing aid compatible task force. That refers to, see, you know more than I do. You're dangerous over there. I appreciate you're so active in this. I really do. Comments to the hearing aid compatible, it's telephone task force. This is at the FCC. Recommendations regarding 100% hearing aid compatible phones. Also at the FCC, the telephone caption quality measures and metrics working group, which is looking at setting metrics and testing requirements for quality performance of internet protocol captions. Closed caption display settings. This is also at the FCC. There are advanced negotiations regarding positions of a number of parties on closed captioning display settings. I think that's about positioning and maybe about type, font, and size. I'm not sure. Continuing with the FCC, and we're still at regulatory action, there's a working group to develop best practices on AI. We know what AI is, the generative, what's the A stand for? Yeah, thank you. Intelligence, thank you. To caption live video programming. This is a big deal. Video is being captioned or not. So we're working on that in this case too. At the Department of Transportation, the accessibility and transportation facilities, we have submitted comments to DOT in response to their request for information on accessibility improvements for transportation facilities. I imagine that's a really wide scope there in terms of what is being offered. Insurance coverage, health insurance coverage for hearing aids at Blue Cross Blue Shield. Hearing Loss Association sent a letter in mid-February to Blue Cross Blue Shield to urge consideration of their newly instituted. They basically set up some, this is for federal employees, they set up some gatekeeping that was reducing the uptake on hearing aids. We're trying to break those barriers down. The U.S. Department of Transportation's Aviation Security Advisory Committee. There is a Passengers with Disabilities Working Group, and we're part of that, making recommendations on facilitating security screening for passengers with disabilities. That's a biggie. If you fly, you know how inhospitable airports and airplanes and the whole thing is. Where is Mary Chiswick? Is she still here? Good. Working on communication access and healthcare committee, working on access to telehealth, networking with healthcare providers and cross-disability organizations, working on access to healthcare. Continuing legislation. Now, this was all regulatory stuff, the deep state that makes things happen in Washington. Now to the legislature. The FAA DOT Air Carrier Access Act. This is a reauthorization. The FAA is being reauthorized. Periodically, these big agencies get retooled and there's new legislation. So when that's happening, if you have an axe to grind, you want to jump in and be part of the process. So reauthorization of the FAA is getting closer. There are accessibility provisions in both the House and the Senate. You know, they don't work together. They work separately, and then they try to jam the two versions together, including the importance of effective communication throughout the journey at the airport and in flight. We are working with a cross-disability coalition led by the Paralyzed Veterans of America. You know, we spend this business of doing advocacy requires a lot of holding hands. We don't just do it solo. You look for other groups that have the same interest and you try to expand your clout and multiply it by working together. The CVTA, otherwise known as Communications Video and Technology Accessibility Act, led by, as always, Senator Edward Markey of Massachusetts and Representative Eshoo of California. This is a long-running story. We've had problems getting this passed, but the goal is we work with a coalition of people with hearing loss and those with blindness to support and promote the adoption of this act, the passing of it. If passed, this act, the CVTA, Communications, Video, and Technology Accessibility, will ensure access and enhance accessibility to communications, video, and technology accessibility. And this is really key. If Lise Hamlin were here, she would emphasize this: emerging products and services that continue to become essential. The idea is we don't want to get left behind. We all know how fast the world changes with respect to technology, but as new technologies are rolled out, we want to be at the front of the line. We don't want to have to fight for access in an after the fact way. So CVTA, Communications, Video, and Technology Accessibility Act, is really key in this regard. We have not been successful in getting this passed, but Senator Markey's been a longtime friend and we continue to work on this. And then video programming access, required closed caption for online video programming. That's a separate effort. And that's really what I have. And I don't do a real great job at this, but if you think about what we were talking about, healthcare, access to communications and whatever, transportation access, these are some of the biggies. And it's a lot of what our donor dollars buy from Hearing Loss National. We don't hear about this. It's ongoing, ongoing, ongoing. I will say to you that some of you know Lise Hamlin. She's been around for a long time, was a native of New York City. She was involved in starting the New York State Association. If you look at the incorporation papers, her signature's on there, along with one Susan Lee Miller, among other people. So Lise has retired. She's doing a little consulting through the end of the year, but we have a replacement whose name I don't have. And I apologize for that. I looked and I looked and I looked and I couldn't find it, but I've met the gentleman. He is mid-career. He is connected in Washington. He understands what we do, and all from everything I can see, we're very fortunate to have recruited him in a tough labor market in Washington. So, any questions on the advocacy work?
Thanks. I've been sitting on the hospital committee and we talk about access to medical care, and Mary's familiar with that. The insurance companies nationwide are promoting and coercing people into telemed. But I have defined a telemed And in talking to the various doctors, they're willing to do it. But the problem is they have to read it to correct any mistakes because there's no medical vocabulary in these AI generated captioning systems. So from the standpoint of productivity, I'd like to see an added task at national level because of its national interest in getting some medical professionals together. Doesn't need to be doctors, but getting them together to create a medical library for the captioning systems.
I agree with you. It's a real issue. I know personally, when the bug hit, I was with my internist, good young guy, really good young doctor. And I said, Leor, we may be doing distance stuff. Do you do that? Yes, I do. I said, good. I said, now I may need captions on that. So I'll call you and I'll set up the Zoom and I'll get the captions set up because I know how to do that. Oh, you can't do that. We would initiate the call. And I said, why? And I said, well, we need to own the captions. And it's then that I found out that this is at Strong, and I think I'm correct in my understanding their policy. Uh, University of Rochester Medical Center's policy is that captions used in that environment, the doctor-patient environment must be provided by a live captioner. They will not accept voice recognition software generated captions. So we do have a lot to work on. And I think there's Danny, you looking for the mic here? Oh, okay. Thanks. So I agree with you. It's an issue. And we haven't been really engaged on that front. I'm not sure why, but I'll find out because it is a need. Um, among other needs in the healthcare and access to healthcare. Thank you. Thank you very much, Eric. Anything else on access? It's a lot there, but I wanted to go through that recitation so you'd have a sense what your national organization is trying to get done. So thank you for listening. Yeah, I'm going to switch to Hearing Loss Association's finances. And I'll kind of recap this based on what I know from my time with the organization. I was in a strange position when I walked in here in 2005 and then went to the 2006 convention that was in Washington. And Sue Miller had done that would you ever consider thing with me. And it was good really because my life was a wreck. I needed things to do and I was a willing recruit to do whatever I was asked to do. And at that time, the national organization was a financial person would say technically bankrupt. The balance sheet had very little in the way of assets and the liabilities were greater than the assets, which is a technical bankruptcy. So Ann Pope of New York City, who was the chair back then through Sue Miller, met me and she thought, oh, well, we don't have any money. That means we have financial problems. That means we want this guy, me, on the national board. So it's how I got on the national board because we really had financial issues. Now, somebody like me, my background is accounting a long time ago and finance. We don't dream up how to get money. I mean, if you don't have money, you don't want an accountant, you want a fundraiser. But anyway, that's a different question. So I saw the organization back then. And from what I hear from the time Rocky Stone founded the organization, it's been kind of hand to mouth. Some of the folklore has little old ladies from the chapters taking money to Rocky Stone and saying, here's $10, because he ran the organization out of his basement with no cash coming in. It was all volunteers. So fast forward to today, starting in about 2010, the finances started to turn around. That was a product of two things. One, we had executive directors and accounting help who took seriously budgets and living within budget. So there was that management stuff that was going well. And the other thing that happened was people started to die and leave bequests to the organization. So as we sit here now and talk about hearing loss associations finances, we have a reasonable buffer of reserves, which is a welcome change from just 17, 18 years ago. And it's you can't always control how your finances are going to look year to year because the world changes. And that's the second piece of what I want to say. The world is changing for small not-for-profit organizations now. I don't know whether we can blame this on the advent of the COVID bug and how that changed our culture, but small not-for-profits are finding the fundraising challenge to be greater than it has been. If you keep up with this stuff or occasionally see articles in the paper, you'll see that, and we are no exception. I expect, based on the knowledge I have, that we'll run a deficit this year, first deficit year in like 8 or 9 years. It'll be a couple 100,000, which sounds like a lot, but we're well buffered. It's not an emergency, but we are in response to this, and really before, we are ramping up efforts to be a more mature organization in terms of how we go about financing ourselves. In particular, working to develop expanded corporate relationships and partnerships where there's can be some cash flow coming in. But it's a challenge for the board. It's a challenge for management. What has happened at this time, as we've hit this difficult environment for fundraising, the board also decided that it was time that we expanded our reach, that being the best kept secret in the country was not really befitting an organization that is at the same time the go-to organization, consumer organization. We are number one in terms of representing hard of hearing people. So we have expanded the staff a little bit by 2 or 3 people, but that's cash. And we have looked, we've talked about this. We talked about it in November and in March when I said, we're going to stay the course. This isn't something where you decide to get better in the communications realm and then say, oh my goodness, we can't afford Meredith anymore. So we're fortunate that we've banked these reserves. They're invested prudently. And so it goes. And I'll be periodically talking about this subject. Again, it's not a reason to worry, but it's a challenge. All organizations have challenge, and we want to expand the reach and the scope and the scale of Hearing Loss Association. To do that, it takes staff additions and it takes finding the cash to pay for it. So that's an operating and governance challenge that we're facing now. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. And again, my friend Eric over here, I know I'm almost certain that you are really plugged into this. And I just raise it here because because it's about us. This is the question, the overall question of the relationship between untreated hearing loss, that is people with hearing loss who aren't using hearing aids, and cognitive decline, AKA the D word, dementia. In April of 2023, the Lancet Public Health Journal published findings from researchers. And I want to just cut to some of their conclusions here. They postulate, based on data they looked at, that up to 8% of dementia cases could be prevented with proper hearing loss management, i.e. wearing hearing aids. Later on in the paper, in conclusion, compared with people with normal hearing, those with hearing loss had a 42% higher risk of dementia, and the use of hearing aids was associated with a risk of dementia similar to that of people without hearing loss. So the Lancet Public Health Journal, I gather, is a respected journal, publishes academic and perhaps other pieces as well. But this article made quite a splash. with a lot of providers, audiologists, hearing aid manufacturers, cochlear implant manufacturers, trumpeting the idea, don't neglect to get your hearing aids. Otherwise, you could be in bad shape when you get older. So then in December of 2023, 8 months later, the Lancet Public Health Journal retracted the article. And that was at the behest of a young researcher in Great Britain who, and this research took place in the British Isles too. It's where the population was. This young researcher tried to replicate the findings of this article, and he couldn't do it. And there was enough pushback and conversation that the Lancet Public Health Journal saw fit to retract this article. So I bring this up because we have a couple of academics on the hearing loss board. One in particular, Jan Bluestein, have just recently retired from New York University. She's an MD and a PhD. She's really got to be in her bonnet about this, with concerns about the concerns are, I'll probably won't sum this all that well, but the concerns really are the confusion in the language between correlation and causation. Correlation being if two variables correlate, they tend to happen together, but that doesn't mean that one causes the other. So there's that, and that's a very real concern to not confuse the two. And the second thing that Jan Bluestein, and she has a couple of writers working with her, is that, this is to me a broader theme, it is that talking about untreated hearing loss on the one hand and cognitive decline in later years on the other stigmatizes further hearing loss. Now, I'm not going to jump in here and tell you what I think. That's not the point of this. I think this discussion is really something a lot of us are going to want to follow. So Dan, when we talk about putting some stuff out there, circulating it, this is another piece I have that I think the wider chapter, some people will really want to talk about. I don't, or follow. And I don't know whether we're using the website or email, but we can talk about that separately. But this is interesting, and it's not going away. In late February, we moved our national board meeting, which was supposed to take place like March 2nd. They moved it up to February at the end because there was a program at the Australian Embassy that was sponsored by Cochlear Americas, you know, these things. And it was, the program included Barbara Kelly on a panel, a guy named Larry Burns, who was a VP at General Motors, a high-ranking vice president who has a bad hearing loss, I might add. And then Frank Lynn, our old friend from Johns Hopkins. Now, Frank Lynn is really beating the tub here for the connection between hearing loss and problems in later life, cognitive decline. And it's kind of interesting to follow the conversation, because academics, when they start fighting each other over research, you better get out of the way because it's serious stuff. And so we're seeing points I mean, Frank Lynn is a well-respected, well-known researcher, and he is an academic entrepreneur, meaning he markets what he's doing. He's glib, he talks fast, he's smarter than anybody in the room. But there are people who are saying, Frank, you know, you're talking too fast. You need to stick with the data, and we need to be clear about causation versus correlation so that we're not misinforming people. So we will get out to you. We have a summary of the Lancet journal retraction. And I also have a letter from an audiologist, I think she's Canadian, I'm not sure, who speculates about the problem with the data and what it may or may not mean. So all that by way of just something that's interesting, that's it's current news, and it's probably something we all ought to pay attention to. Any questions or comments on that? We'll get the information. Eric.
Just one quickie, one study done here in the US, sponsored by John Hopkins, indicates that there is a correlation between hearing loss and what time, how quickly you attend to it, and how long it takes before you need assisted living. And the study concluded that folks who attend to hearing loss early on save themselves up to 5 years of assisted living care.
I just have to add one. I've thought about this a lot because I've heard Jan Bluestein talk about this at our board meetings. I've read her stuff. In a way, I don't know about causation and correlation. I think I know, but I won't say what I think I know. But when I think about this, the way I think about it is, if I had an Uncle Harry who was older than I, and Uncle Harry's hearing wasn't so great, and I knew all that I think I know based on my personal experience, I would be working on my Uncle Harry to get hearing aids. And I would tell him, look, we don't know for sure, but this, if you don't do this, you could end up in it could be a problem for you as you get older. To me, that's a no brainer, but the conversation's going to go on for a while, and we'll see. So I just brought that because I thought it would be interesting. The last thing I have no idea where we are time. The last thing I have is the convention, the 2025 convention. And I also have something else to say about conventions, but the 2025 convention will be in the Midwest this time, Indianapolis, Indiana. Not everybody's sense of a vacation destination, but that's where we're doing it. It's at a Marriott. The dates are early. The dates are June 12 to 14. So now, don't tell anybody. I think they're going to announce it later this week. I suspect that they don't have the deal signed, but Barbara Kelly felt comfortable enough to tell the board about it in a recent one of her mailings. The other thing about conventions is, since the pandemic, we have not, I'm supposed to be standing in front of it. We have not done as well in terms of attendance. The numbers have been in the area of 400 to 450, whereas prior conventions could go 700 to 1,000, depending on the location, 1,200. So the world has changed, and what management is going to do with this is do the convention in Indianapolis, and then really parse the data and look at how we might adjust what we're doing. One idea, this is just something that's been advanced, would be that maybe the in-person convention is every other year, and that in the off years there would be virtual programming that's shared. We know, I mean, we all know that that the finances can be an issue for people. It can be expensive to attend these conventions. The June timeframe doesn't always work for people either. So, but that's what I know about conventions. And I'd be happy to take questions you have about national. I don't always know the answers, but I'll try to come up with them if you have. So.
Peter, just a comment on the conventions. One of the problems that a lot of us have as we get older is we have family members that are disabled. It's not really feasible to pick up and leave town for 4 or 5 days. And so anything more that can be done virtually is very attractive. And that's just a comment on There are those of us that are interested in the messaging and what's coming through, but we just physically can't really get there, you know? And while I got the mic, I just want to make one other comment. It happened that Lifespan brought a doctor in who runs the longevity clinic at the Cleveland Clinic. And they're doing research. His name is Rosen or something like that. I can't remember. I'm like you, I can't remember names. But anyhow, he gave a very good lecture and he's written a whole bunch of bestsellers and books. And he said, we think that we will be able to extend the average lifespan of people in the United States about 10 years, within 10 or 15 years. Well, maybe not that quick, but that's where they're going. A component of that is dealing with hearing loss. Okay. That's one of the piece parts of the puzzle that they have to put together. The other thing I stumbled into, and I think Frank Lynn was a part of this because John Hopkins was involved. It's an NIH study that came out on Alzheimer's, and they gave a good number of people who have Alzheimer's hearing aids, and they found there was no impact of people that were died in the wool Alzheimer's, but people who are prone to get Alzheimer's, and now they can find this early on. We have researchers here, and this Dr. Pornstein is working on this kind of stuff. They can find by blood testing that someone in their 50s is prone to have Alzheimer's when they're in their 70s or 80s. And what this study found was if they deal with hearing loss before the person has Alzheimer's, there is a significant impact on keeping the Alzheimer's off by maybe 5 years. So this is kind of, there's a pattern here of everything's finding 5 to 7 years of impact.
My guess is, and I don't know all the research that's being done, but my guess is that this Lancet study, which took, as I understand it, they didn't design the research and then develop the data. They took data that was already out there from a number of studies. So that's another thing that sticks in the craw of the academic researchers. Oh, well, you don't do that. You design your research, you develop the population, the sample, and then you do the whole thing to develop the data. Whereas the Lancet study was derived from data that was already out there. But you got to think there are a lot of people working on this kind of thing, and that this brouhaha, this academic brouhaha, I would think will bring us more information that will start to lend clarity to what is now kind of a confusing mess right at the moment.
The other side of this thing is the economics. If you can make it so a large component of the population can avoid going into assistive care and nursing homes for, say, 5 to 10 years in the future, the economic impact of that on our economy and the burden on our federal dollars is really significant. It makes the cost of hearing aids look rather minor. And I'm going to give this to Eric.
Yeah, just a couple of quickies right and piggyback on that. The insurance companies are interested in hospital costs and particularly interested in recurring hospital costs. And they've done a study of their customers, that again, correlation rather than causation. But there's a correlation that suggests that people with hearing loss uncorrected are 50% more likely to be in the hospital for something. And they're also 50% more likely to have the recurring problem within 30 days, which costs the insurance companies a lot of money. That's why they're looking at it. So again, correlation versus causation, you're talking about the human body, but correlation speaks volumes to me, you know. Same thing with balance. So that's the reason I have to carry a stick. There's a correlation between hearing loss and balance loss. Because of the severity of my hearing loss, the correlation is more like 90% of people like me have balance issues, and it's very real.
Thank you, Eric.
I think it's important to bring clarity to this muddled Lancet article because it is a muddied correlation, because moving to problems in later age is probably multifactorial, and you want to determine what those other factors are. Are they diabetes? Are they cardiovascular? Are they balance? Are they isolation? What is going on in the elder's life? And we don't want to not look at those other factors. We want to determine what those other correlations are and not ignore them, because they probably are so important, and they may be even more important than the hearing loss, because many elders, some of whom are in our own community, do very well with their hearing loss, that when corrected, they do wonderfully through their elder years. So we don't want to lose sight of those other factors that are correlations in the elder years.
If Dr. Bluestein were here, she would be saying absolutely right. She makes the distinction between how you can generalize and conclude about populations versus the individual. Because what can be true of populations has no real impact on the individual with his or her particular physical, mental state, issues.
Well, I think the desire of people to stay independent and be able to keep communicating with people and learning has a lot to do with keeping out of a nursing home. And people who refuse to get hearing aids, they become more dependent on people. I mean, I know if I take mine out, I can't hear anything. I mean, it's terrible. If I had to live like that, I don't know what I would do. So if they refuse to get hearing aids, they're just going to lose their desire to keep living or to live on their own. And you're right. I mean, like, I have cancer and I've been fighting it for 13, 15 years, but I have my hearing aids and I can keep going. And I really think it has a lot to do with the personality also, and the initiative that people take of their own, keeping out of a nursing home. Some people are just want to be dependent on everybody, and other people want to be independent and keep going. So, and the other thing I wanted to say was, now I don't know if I'm going to be here in another year because of my cancer, but Indianapolis is where my son lives. He lives northeast in Carmel, and I drive that. I have in the past in one day. It's a long drive, but you don't have to take an airplane to get there. In fact, getting there by airplane, you have to go to Washington or Boston, or you can't go there directly. So if you're thinking about going there, it's possible to drive there, and it is a nice city. And I just wanted to put a plug in. I wish I was going to be here. I don't know if I will or not, but I would go if it was there,
Plan on being.
So I just wanted to add that.
It strikes me that with this talk about causation, correlation, and all of that, that what the big backdrop to this issue is the less than half of people who can benefit from hearing aids actually have them. And with cochlear implants, if you believe the cochlear implant companies, the uptake is less than 10% of people who could benefit from these appliances who actually have them. So I think the messaging will sort itself out. But then the question of how do we increase the uptake is a big one. A friend, Joe Kozelski, and I have broken bread over this question. And Joe's quite the scientist, the analyst in his mind. And he tells me that the uptake, meaning the percent of people needing hearing aids who use them in Europe, is very similar to the US. And yet most of the European countries fund the purchase of hearing aids. So what do you make of that? All of a sudden, the cost issue is maybe that's not really where the challenge is. So someone has,
You had mentioned the insurance companies having data that indicated people without hearing aids can have increased costs associated. Do you think, is there, or are there some advantages going to be taken of that attitude to try to get insurance companies to more cover hearing aids? A lot of people that may not have them, it might be because of cost issues.
I don't know how to predict that because it's politics to a certain extent. I have two things to say about that, though, that I do know about. My friend Joe Kozelski again believes that if I talk to him about passing a law in New York State to require insurance to fund hearing aids, and Joe said, I've done the math, and I can pretty much prove that the cost of the legislation would be a rounding error for the state government, primarily because the uptake's not going to be 100%. It's going to be much less than the number who can benefit. Second thing I'll say is entirely different. Our friends in Washington State have legislation that just went on the books, signed by the governor, that mandates, and I can't speak to the specifics, it mandates insurance reimbursement for hearing aids. We're going to get that. There are two acts, two laws. We're going to get those as a model, and we're going to share them with our friends in Albany, because this is finished legislation that will be a great point of departure for purposes of having conversations.
Pete, you mentioned something about National and Blue Cross Blue Shield. I'm a federal employee, and the information that I got was that I needed to have an audiogram done by an audiologist and be seen by an otolaryngologist for them to reimburse the $2,500. Is that it?
Yeah, what I read here was, yes, that from what I got from this language here was that what Hearing Loss Association's pushing against is the need to have a doctor's imprimatur before people see an audiologist. Because that's old school. That used to be that way in New York, and now that requirement no longer exists, right? So this is a federal employee issue, but that's a big group of people that are affected.
Hey Pete, this is Dan speaking. Have National considered maybe going hybrid, like we're here in the state conference with hybrid, for the convention? You could have it maybe a separate cost, a lower cost for people that join via, Zoom, and a different price for those that come in person. So just something to consider.
I don't know to what extent the coming convention in Phoenix will be that way, but I think everything will be on the table. Hybrid's not easy. Our experts here would tell you, we've had experience in our last board meeting at a convention, which would have been in New Orleans. We did a hybrid board meeting. What a disaster. What a disaster. And now board meetings are different than programming. I get that, but the experience with the board meeting was not good, and it just disrupted the hybrid nature of it, disrupted the meeting. So, but I think everything will be on the table because the economics are not supporting the old model. Okay, so.
Just a couple quickies. I made the statement that I am strongly influenced by correlations. I'm also a statistician, and the reason for my favoritism towards correlation is that you're right. There are 99 factors involved in cognitive slippage, but with every one that you add, you increase the necessary sample size to figure anything out. And pretty soon you're talking about the national population. So that's a problem. And in terms of the UK, I used to live in the UK for 8 years. And if their hearing care is anything like their dental care, abandon all hope.
So, well, I appreciate your listening. Those of you who are online, Fred, how you doing? Fred Altreith is online. Is there anything else, or are we gonna fold this up a little early? Well, thank you for listening. Any feedback you have on what I covered and the way I covered it?
Okay, who raised your hand? Somebody remotely raised your
Terrific.
hand?
There's Doug and Nancy. How you doing?
It looked like Fred did. Fred, can you unmute yourself?
Terrific. A lot of people,
Yeah.
online.
I was not a person who did
It's
raise
really
my hand.
working. What you guys are doing to bring the hybrid really is helpful, isn't it?
It is,
It's like 50% of the number that's here, right? Yeah.
looks like it today. Usually more in person than there is remote, but it can be done. And you're right, it really requires professional people that know what they're doing
Oh,
to put on such a production. There are companies that do it. So Fred, it's just unmuted. Go ahead, Fred.
Yes, what I have to say, lately now, for several years now, I'm confined to a nursing home. At the present time, I'm in Batavia, New York, and I can't tell you how important my cochlear implant has been for me in visiting these, being in these nursing homes, and having the remote mic is so important, and talking to the doctors and the nurses. And I'll tell you, without these hearing aids, I'd really be having a lot of problems, because I see the same thing happen to a lot of people that are here that don't have hearing aids, that certainly could use them. And the benefit that they're talking about, educating these people that work in these nursing homes, is so important, because in my particular case, most of them know now if I have a problem just trying to get the thing over my magnet, they understand what I'm talking about, how a cochlear implant works, and how a hearing aid works. So this new setup that they're proposing now for teaching these people going into nursing to be familiar with the hearing loss, because as I say, as they mentioned there, it affects your life as a whole. In other words, if I was in this place and I had no way of communicating, I'd be waiting real quick to go, for sure. But I very much, I tried to help. The neck loop is so important that I try to promote him as much as I can here in the nursing home where I am at the present time. One fellow bought one of the pocket talkers that I talked about, and he took his other hearing aids off and put them in his pocket. He said, "This is better than my hearing aids." So it's just educating people. And that's all we should keep doing constantly, because with this dementia and everything, as of this month, I'll be 96. And so I'm just hanging in there. And
Thank
I
you, Fred.
appreciate all the messages and cards I get from everybody. Believe me, for the holidays, it was a pleasure to receive them. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Fred. I see we have one other person with her hand up. It's Michelle F. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, hi, I'm tuning in from Fox Valley, Wisconsin, where it's snowing right now. So I just wanted to pop on quickly and say a couple things. First of all, thank you again for allowing us across the country to tune in to your meetings. I have been, in a number of them over the last few years, so I really appreciate that. I was really interested in hearing what's going on at the national level. So thank you, Peter, for excuse me, explaining everything that you did. I had to take a call during part of the meeting and I got on late, so I missed some of it. So I might have to go back and watch the recap. but I do appreciate. I just recently signed up for the Phoenix National Convention to get the early bird rate, last week. So, and I didn't know, where the next convention was going to be. So I'm like, okay, I want to go in case it's not in the Midwest anytime soon. But now you just said it's going to be up here in the Midwest. So I guess maybe I'll be going next year also.
We'll look forward to seeing you, Michelle. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks for everything. And did you say you were gonna send information out regarding some of those studies and the whole Lancet article retract and everything?
Yes, and what I'll do is I'm going to give my friends over here my business card. Can you share my email that's on here through chat? So Lauren Gallistel, one of our
Okay.
IT gurus here, along with Charlie Johnstone, is going to put in chat my email address. And Michelle, if you watch for that, and then anybody else who's online, if you want me to ship materials directly to you, I'll be glad to do that.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. I don't know if you guys know, but we're doing a state conference that we do every other year. We're having our state conference in April, later this month. And we're actually going to have a focus on communication access and accessibility in public venues, especially in hearing healthcare appointments or visits or medical appointments, hospitals. So we have invited a lot of, medical or just professionals. So I was intrigued by Fred's comments just a minute ago. I applaud you, Fred, for doing everything you're doing in your place where you're living. And we do need to reach out and educate them so much on how to accommodate those of us with hearing loss in those public settings. So we actually are going to have Franklin's associate, Dr. Nick Reed, is going to be coming from Johns Hopkins to speak at our conference. So we are super excited to have him come and talk about, he's been doing, I think it's called the Achieve trial study that he's doing out there with hearing loss and aging. So I'm anxious to hear what he has to say about all this aging and cognitive decline stuff. But if you have some, background information, I'd love to get up to speed on some of the history a little bit before he comes and talks to us.
Michelle, we're about to ring off because we stopped right at 1 because of to be considerate of the captioner, right? So, but if you would share, you and I are going to be back and forth on email. If you'd share information about the Wisconsin conference, I'll be sure to get that spread around here. We might have a few takers on that.
Great. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Just one quickie. I was reminded when we saw the online participants that they weren't able to see some of the things that you were able to see. And if we can switch back to the podium camera, fellas. Yeah, there we go. This is what that hearing loss receiver system looks like. It's a backdrop, it's the receiver itself. There we go. And there's a placard that goes with it And basically what the placard says is if you're curious what's on the hearing loop, borrow this and find out. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, the captionists. And thank you for everybody that attend, and please don't forget to fill out the evaluations that are on the table. And those remotely, you can email your evaluations. So thank you, and we'll see you next month. Thank you. Bye-bye.